What if the most loyal royal of the 20th century left behind a message that might just destroy the royal family of the 21st? Because that's exactly what appears to have happened. A letter, sealed, hidden, preserved in the vaults of Windsor Castle, written by Prince Philip, not long before his death. And according to a leak so explosive it's rattled royal insiders across both hemispheres, this wasn't just any sentimental farewell or tribute to family. No, this was something far more shocking. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was a deliberate, targeted inheritance directive, a secret written in ink, but dripping with centuries of royal expectation. And the most jaw-dropping detail? He left his personal fortune to Prince William, and very specifically excluded Prince Harry. Not accidentally, not vaguely, but intentionally, explicitly. He even underlined it. Let that sink in. Why would Prince Philip, famous for his duty, loyalty, and fierce love of country, choose to completely disinherit his own grandson? A grandson he once mentored, praised, and protected? Was it punishment for the Oprah interview? Was it revenge for Spare? Or was it something far more personal, something deeper, rooted in betrayal, shame, or private disappointment that the public never saw? And what happens when a monarchy that prides itself on discretion suddenly finds its dirty financial laundry hung out for the world to see? Because make no mistake, this wasn't meant for the tabloids. This wasn't meant for the world. This wasn't even meant for most of the family. The letter was never supposed to be opened publicly. It was tucked into a sealed private collection marked for review by select advisors only. Locked in the same section of the Windsor archives where the Queen keeps correspondence from her great-grandmother. Most royal staff didn't even know it existed. And yet here we are. So how did it leak? Who leaked it? Why now? And perhaps more importantly, what exactly did it say? According to insider sources, the language is damning. It names William as the sole custodian of legacy assets and mentions my grandson Harry only once, with an icy note that reads, "He has chosen a different path. And with that, he has chosen different consequences. Cold. Final. Surgical. It was a cut, not just from money, but from meaning. Because this wasn't just about wealth. This was about inheritance, about royal identity, about which grandson Prince Philip believed deserved to carry on his legacy, and which one, in his eyes, had thrown it away. Let's rewind. Remember who Prince Philip really was. The man behind the stoic silhouette. The man who built his identity on duty, honor, and never complaining. The man who walked 3 paces behind the Queen for over 70 years and never once publicly faltered. That man didn't do things by accident. He didn't write casual letters. He wrote statements of intent. So if he left behind a document like this, it was with precision, with deliberation, with a purpose that now threatens to upend the already fragile fabric of the post-Megxit monarchy. Because for all the headlines about King Charles, for all the noise around Harry and Meghan's Netflix deals, their memoirs, their awards show drama, this letter slices through it all like a knife. It's pure. It's old school. It's monarchical. It's Prince Philip at his most unfiltered. And now it's out, whether Buckingham Palace likes it or not. So let's set the scene. It's late 2020. COVID still lingers. The Queen is in deep retreat at Windsor. Prince Philip, though frail, is lucid. His days are quiet, filled with reading, private meetings, and, according to some insiders, dictating a handful of personal instructions to trusted aides. He was nearing the end, and he knew it. And there was one matter still unresolved in his mind. Who would inherit his personal estate? Not the crown estate, not the Duchy of Lancaster, not the official palaces or the ceremonial titles, but his private investments, his own money. Quietly amassed through savvy decisions, military pensions, discreet overseas holdings, and decades of compound interest. Estimates vary, but by the time of his death, his personal fortune was rumored to hover between 30 to 36 million pounds. A tidy sum. Clean. Liquid. Private. He could have left it to any number of individuals, his children, his charities, even his great-grandchildren. But he chose William, not Charles, the son who waited decades to take the throne. Not Anne, the daughter who never complained, never flinched. And not Harry, the grandson who once walked behind his coffin, solemn, grieving, beloved by the public. He chose William. The reason? According to the letter, it's legacy. It's continuity. It's about trusting the crown to one who still believes in it. Think about that. In one sentence, Prince Philip may have undermined everything Harry has claimed to stand for in the past 5 years. The therapy, the memoir, the confessions, the complaints, the exposés, the new identity forged in Montecito. To Philip, it seems, all of that was a betrayal of the monarchy. And that makes this letter not just a financial bombshell, but a moral one. Because now, for the first time, the royal family is being forced to reckon with something they rarely face head-on: emotional favoritism. Grandfather to grandson. A private loyalty made public. And here's the part that's truly unsettling. Harry didn't even find out from the family. He wasn't told privately. There was no courtesy call, no respectful heads-up. He found out through the press. Imagine the sting. Imagine reading in a newspaper, or worse, seeing it trend on social media, that your own grandfather not only cut you out of his estate, but left behind words that suggest you don't even deserve a mention, that you're not family anymore, that you've chosen different consequences. It's brutal, ice cold, and yet, that's exactly how Prince Philip operated. Old world. No frills, no frilly emotions, no second chances. He reportedly told one advisor, "If you abandon the mission, you don't get the medals." Direct, unsentimental, ruthless even. But does that mean he stopped loving Harry? Or was this his way of showing tough love? A final attempt to push Harry back into the royal fold? There are royal insiders who believe this was his final test, a move designed to provoke Harry into returning, into rejecting the comforts of exile and reclaiming his place in the firm. But if that's true, it may have backfired. Because Harry's reaction, sources say, was explosive. One confidant said he was shocked, heartbroken, and then livid. And Meghan? Reportedly livid from the start. She allegedly warned Harry that they would do this to you eventually, and now felt vindicated. Which begs the question, did she know this was coming? Was the letter's existence quietly whispered about behind palace walls for years? Was it used as leverage? Because one thing is clear, this wasn't written in haste. It wasn't scrawled on a notepad. It was drafted, reviewed, sealed, and placed with instructions. It was designed to be discovered after Queen Elizabeth's death, when the line of succession would be settled and the dust of Megxit had long since settled. That's the part that's haunting. Prince Philip wasn't reacting. He was planning. He waited. He knew that this would matter most not when the world was full of noise, but when the new order had arrived. When William would be next in line. When Charles would be king. When Harry's podcast dreams and Hollywood handshakes would seem small against the crown's enduring shadow. He chose his moment. And it's now. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because the letter wasn't supposed to surface. Not now. Not ever. For decades, royal insiders whispered about Prince Philip's private papers. The collection was legendary. No photos. No digital scans. Just thick, cream-colored envelopes sealed in wax and filed away in the most secure chambers of Windsor Castle. Most were presumed to be stiff farewells, letters of affection to the Queen, or instructions about funeral arrangements. But one of them, just one, was different. It was marked not with Philip's usual monogram, but a strange, discreet symbol, a Maltese cross fused with a royal cipher. Even the archivists didn't know what it meant. They weren't supposed to. The instructions were chillingly specific. To be opened upon the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, by direct order of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Contents not to be disclosed to media, public, or unauthorized royal staff. And yet here we are. So how did it escape the castle walls? Who opened it? And more dangerously, who leaked it? Let's go back to the moment everything shifted. The Queen had just passed. September 2022. The United Kingdom was in mourning. Charles was ascending. William was preparing to become the Prince of Wales. And Harry was watching the entire operation from across the Atlantic, with barely a whisper of acknowledgement from the palace. But inside Windsor, a quiet process had already begun. The late Queen's personal papers were being reviewed, catalogued, and sorted by a small team of archivists and legal custodians, people with full MI5 level clearance. Among them was an enigmatic figure known only in court circles as Lady W. She wasn't a celebrity. not a household name. But within the palace system, Lady W was legendary. Think, the Olivia Colman character from The Crown, but even colder. She had handled classified correspondence between Queen Elizabeth and President Eisenhower. She had once burned a telegram from Princess Margaret that could have ended 2 political careers. She was the keeper of the old world, a vault in human form. And yet, according to one anonymous insider, she made a fateful decision in October 2022. She opened the envelope. The exact circumstances are murky. Some say it was deliberate. Others say it was an error, a misfiled document mistaken for something else. One theory, that Lady W had always known this letter existed and had waited decades for her moment. But when she opened it, she reportedly didn't read it alone. She summoned 2 individuals, a high-ranking royal financial trustee and a legal advisor with links to the Duchy of Cornwall. No Charles, no William, no Harry, just them. And what they read, sources say, sent shockwaves through the room. Prince Philip's letter wasn't sentimental. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even polite. It was strategic. For pages. Handwritten. Bold script. Laced with military tone. It laid out the distribution of Prince Philip's personal fortune, detailed instructions for how it should be protected, and very specific language about who should receive what. But the line that changed everything? Let it be known that my personal holdings, those not attached to the crown, shall pass in full to my grandson William. He alone shall carry the values I hold dear. And then, just a few lines later, came the dagger. As for my grandson Harry, he has made his choice. And so, I make mine. No ambiguity. No space for interpretation. It was like a will, without the legal formality. But the intent? Crystal clear. Now, here's where it gets even more mysterious. According to multiple sources, the letter wasn't technically legally binding. Philip's actual will was sealed under British law in 2021 and kept hidden for 90 years, as per royal tradition. No one outside of a few legal minds knows its full contents. But this letter? This was personal. And personal in the monarchy often outweighs paperwork. In fact, several royal historians have pointed out that handwritten letters from senior royals, especially those referencing private assets, have historically been honored as moral directives, meaning they might not stand up in court, but within the palace, they're treated like sacred law. So the question is, did King Charles honor it? The answer appears to be yes. Because just months after the Queen's death, financial records connected to Philip's private estate began shifting. Quietly, without public disclosure. A trust fund based in the Channel Islands transferred a controlling interest in 2 major assets, a vintage car collection in Surrey and a rare shareholding in a Maltese shipping firm, to an entity linked to Prince William's estate. It was done through shell companies, buried in red tape. But the paper trail exists. The money had moved. And Harry? He received nothing. But he also didn't know. At least not then. The public had no idea this letter existed. The press hadn't caught wind of it. And Buckingham Palace? They were hoping it would stay that way. Enter the leak. According to an unnamed senior aide, everything changed in June 2023 when a redacted version of the letter was accidentally included in a private email exchange between 2 departments, the Royal Archives and the King's Legal Advisory Team. That email was intercepted. How? Still unclear. But within days, an investigative reporter from an overseas news agency, based in Australia, had obtained a partial scan. The wording was unmistakable, the phrasing too precise to be fake. And when excerpts were published online, the palace went into crisis mode. Suddenly, what had been an internal matter, a quiet honoring of a dead man's wishes, became a global media storm. Harry disinherited. William chosen by Philip. Royal rift deepens as secret letter revealed. Tabloids exploded. Twitter/X was on fire. TikTokers reenacted fake scenes of Meghan confronting palace staff. Late-night hosts ran with the story. Even mainstream networks like the BBC and CNN covered it. But behind palace walls, it was even more chaotic. King Charles reportedly summoned 2 of his senior advisors to Sandringham and demanded to know, who leaked it? How bad is this going to get? Because the implications weren't just emotional, they were constitutional. If the public began to believe that inheritance within the royal family was based on loyalty to the crown rather than tradition or equality, it could unravel everything the monarchy was trying to stabilize post-Megxit. The idea that a royal could be disinherited, not for scandal, not for crime, but for stepping away from public duties, was uncharted territory. Was it a private decision, or was it a punishment? And more alarmingly, had the monarchy drawn a red line in permanent ink? But the leak wasn't just limited to financial details. The letter, it turns out, said more. Much more. And what was written on page 3 would ignite a fury not even Buckingham Palace was prepared to contain. That's where everything turned. That's where the letter stopped being just an inheritance note and became something far more personal, far more dangerous. Because on page 3, Prince Philip reportedly made a series of pointed, almost poetic reflections. Not about wealth, not about logistics, but about legacy, loyalty, and blood. And within that page was a line so stark, so direct, that it left even seasoned royal aides speechless. Not all heirs wear crowns, and not all bloodlines deserve the weight of tradition. It was a philosophical slap, a coded message. But to those who followed the royal family's every high and low, the interpretation wasn't difficult. Philip was drawing a line between Harry and William that had nothing to do with their titles and everything to do with their choices. He was, in essence, saying, one of you chose duty, the other chose freedom, and I choose to honor only one of those paths. Think about the weight of that. A grandfather who once shared meals, war stories, and private jokes with both boys, choosing, in the end, to honor only one. A man who knew the sacrifices of monarchy firsthand, who gave up his naval career, who swallowed scandal after scandal without flinching, who knelt behind the throne for 70 years. That man believed in loyalty above all else. And to him, Harry broke that code. Whether you agree or not, that was Philip's stance. And now, thanks to the leak, the world knew it. But the ripple effects? They were only beginning. Because as this page of the letter spread through media circles, scrubbed, redacted, quoted with care, but never denied, it sparked a wave of outrage. Not just from Sussex fans, not just from American commentators, but from inside the royal household. Sources say Princess Anne was one of the first to express concern, not over the content, but the fallout. She feared it would deepen the fracture, one insider revealed. She understood why her father wrote it, but she also knew it would cause damage no PR team could fix. And she was right, because Harry's team in Montecito, caught off guard by the leak, scrambled to control the narrative. Within hours, a statement, thinly veiled but emotionally raw, was posted to a close friend's social media. It read, "We all have memories of those we've lost. Some carry warmth, some carry lessons, but none should be weaponized." It didn't mention Philip, or the letter, or the inheritance, but everyone knew exactly what it meant. And from there, the storm only grew. Questions began flooding into royal legal departments. Was this letter legally binding? Did Harry have grounds to contest it? Could the leak be traced? Lawyers whispered about a possible moral breach, though not a legal one. After all, if the fortune had already been dispersed, as it appeared, it was unlikely anything could be reversed without a massive scandal. But the PR scandal? That was already well underway. The hashtag Justice for Harry trended for 48 hours straight. American news outlets debated royal fairness on primetime television. Oprah's former guests weighed in. And lurking beneath all of it was a darker, more conspiratorial whisper. Had Meghan known about the letter before it leaked? It was a question that rattled more than a few royal insiders, because the timing was convenient. A month before the leak, Meghan had reportedly declined a private invitation from Charles to attend a Royal Foundation event in London. No clear reason was given, but insiders now speculated. Did she already know they were being written out? Of course, no one could prove it, and no official statement ever addressed it. But in the court of public opinion, the damage was done. And yet, despite all this chaos, all this noise, one figure remained publicly silent. Prince William, the chosen heir to Philip's personal fortune, the named recipient of the Duke's trust, the one his grandfather had publicly, posthumously anointed. Not a word, no quote, no appearance, no denial, no celebration, nothing. And that silence, oddly, spoke louder than any press release could have. It painted a picture of restraint, of control, of a man who knew the power of a legacy and the danger of defending it too aggressively. But behind the scenes, Sources say William was furious the letter had leaked, not because of what it said, but because it forced him into a corner. A symbolic inheritance turned scandal. According to one aide, William said, "This wasn't about money. It was about trust. And now it's been turned into gossip." The palace immediately launched a quiet internal investigation into the leak. Fingers pointed, emails were scrubbed, digital trails combed, but nothing stuck. The person who leaked the letter had covered their tracks brilliantly. No one was fired, no arrests, no confession, and the damage was irreversible. Because here's the bitter truth the palace couldn't spin away. This letter had pulled the curtain back on something the monarchy never wanted the world to see. Favoritism, not just parental, but generational, institutional. For decades, the royals had insisted that every grandchild was loved equally. That blood was thicker than duty. That family came first. But Prince Philip's letter told a different story. A story in which loyalty was rewarded, dissent was punished, and love was conditional. To many, it was heartbreaking. To others, just confirmation of what they always suspected. And to Harry? Well, according to friends, it was the final betrayal. Because this wasn't about tabloids or headlines or public opinion. This was about his grandfather, the man who taught him to drive a carriage, who sat next to him at Sandringham dinners, who told war stories while polishing antique rifles. This was about family, and now he had been written out, literally. But what no one expected, not even William, was that this letter wasn't the only one. Because buried in the same sealed folder, just a few inches away, was a second envelope. And what it revealed would shift the royal narrative once again, in the most unexpected direction. Why would Prince Philip bypass his own children and leave everything to his grandson? Not a portion, not a token, not a symbolic heirloom, but everything. That's the question that's haunting every corridor of Buckingham Palace right now. The question that tabloids, talk shows, and legal advisors are picking apart like a puzzle that shouldn't exist. Because according to what's now become one of the most disruptive leaks in royal memory, the Duke of Edinburgh didn't divide his personal fortune among his children. He didn't split it between Charles and Andrew or Edward. He didn't even acknowledge them in the letter. Instead, he named one man, and one man only, as the sole recipient of his private legacy, Prince William. And that move, shocking as it seems, wasn't accidental. It wasn't rushed. It was planned, calculated, and delivered with the kind of surgical coldness that only Philip could muster. Let William carry my legacy. He understands service. He accepts duty. He will not squander what I built. That's the direct quote, word for word, as leaked from the third page of the letter. A legacy, not defined by blood, but by behavior. And in just 14 words, Philip both crowned his grandson and condemned the rest of them. Because make no mistake, this was more than just an inheritance. This was a statement, a passing of the torch not from father to son, but from grandfather to grandson, skipping over generations, defying tradition, bypassing the expected line of descent in favor of something more personal, more deliberate, a choice. But what exactly did William inherit? Let's dig into the numbers. At the time of his death in April 2021, Prince Philip's personal fortune was estimated between £30 and £36 million. That's not the Crown Estate, not the Duchy of Lancaster. That's entirely separate from the institutional wealth of the monarchy. This was his private money, earned, invested, and protected over decades. How did he amass that kind of wealth? Not from his royal salary. That was modest, especially compared to modern standards. No, Philip was quietly one of the savviest financial minds in the royal family. Naval pension aside, he had two aces up his sleeve. Early investments in European shipping ventures post-World War II, particularly in Malta, where he and the young Queen Elizabeth once lived as newlyweds. Rare asset holdings, including a vintage automobile collection and a selection of rare coins and metals acquired during royal visits and diplomatic exchanges, many of which had quietly appreciated in value over the decades. But most of all, Philip was obsessed with control. He kept his money tight, managed through offshore family trusts, and rarely discussed it, except with William. Yes, William. Sources say Prince Philip and William shared quiet financial conversations as early as 2010. One former aide recalls an overheard moment at Sandringham. "You'll have to steward it one day, boy. Don't let the courtiers get their hands on it. At the time, no one thought much of it. Just an old man advising his grandson. But now, in hindsight, it was something more. It was preparation. So why not Charles? That's where things get more complicated. Because Charles, as we all know, is now king. He's inherited far more than his father's private money. He's now the monarch, with full access to the royal portfolio, the duchies, the estates. He's not exactly hurting. But it's the omission that stings. Philip didn't even name him. He didn't even say Charles already has enough. He didn't say Charles will inherit other responsibilities. He said nothing, as if Charles didn't factor into the equation at all. And that silence? It speaks volumes. There have long been rumors, never confirmed, never denied, that Philip had a cold and often transactional relationship with his eldest son. They clashed over philosophy. Charles, emotional, sensitive, occasionally erratic. Philip, hard-edged, military-minded, blunt. One insider once said, Philip wanted a soldier. He got a poet. And though the two reportedly made peace in later years, it seems their fundamental disconnection was never fully repaired. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. Because the financial trail, painstakingly followed by investigative journalists, shows that in the months following the Queen's death, certain family trusts shifted dramatically. One trust, known as the Delphinium Fund, transferred full ownership of a private woodland estate in Norfolk to a holding company linked to William. Another, Lionheart Holdings, previously dormant, suddenly registered activity in Malta, coinciding with the revaluation of several historic properties once connected to Philip's naval days. Even more intriguing, a long-forgotten royal yacht, docked off the coast of Corfu, Philip's birthplace, was quietly refurbished using private funds. Guess who now controls the shell company that owns it? William. The signs are subtle, cloaked in legal fog, but unmistakable to those who know what to look for. William wasn't just named in a letter. He was empowered. He was given access, keys, codes, legacy pathways. And Harry? Not even a mention. Can you imagine being Harry in that moment? Across the ocean, watching this all unfold, piece by piece, from news alerts and social media leaks? Not a call, not a briefing, just headlines that scream, William gets everything. And worse, the letter doesn't just pass over Harry, it warns against him. The tone is unmistakable. A man of war cautioning his heirs. Do not dilute this family's legacy with grievance. We are not victims. We are custodians. That's not just a dig. That's an indictment. A royal rebuke. So how did William react to all this? Did he gloat? Was he conflicted? Did he call Harry and try to soften the blow? No. He said nothing, at least publicly. And that silence only deepened the wound. Because silence, in royal language, is loud. Especially when it follows wealth, legacy, and whispered instructions from beyond the grave. But that raises another question. Was William ready for this responsibility? Because inheriting a fortune is one thing. Inheriting a legacy? That's entirely different. And while Philip's faith in William was clear, not everyone in the royal family was convinced it was the right move, including someone very, very close to both grandsons. Not everyone agreed with Philip's choice. Behind the carefully polished doors of Kensington Palace and Clarence House, there was unease. Quiet unease, but unease nonetheless. Because while William was undeniably groomed for kingship, being handed a private fortune, exclusively, wasn't something anyone had anticipated. Especially not someone like Princess Anne. The ever-loyal, steel-nerved Princess Royal had long been Philip's favorite daughter. She never wavered, never courted drama, never demanded a title for her children. She got up, did the job, and kept her mouth shut. Exactly how Philip liked it. So when she learned, secondhand, that she'd been omitted from her father's personal legacy altogether, her reaction, according to an inside source, was icily neutral. But there was a flicker of something else too. Not bitterness, not even jealousy, but concern. Because Princess Anne, more than anyone, understood what it meant to carry a royal inheritance alone. She saw what it did to Charles, how expectation became pressure, how wealth became chains, and she worried the same fate was now being handed to William, except this time, with a time bomb attached. A fortune wrapped in family fracture. But, and wasn't the only one raising eyebrows. Camilla, now queen consort, reportedly voiced her own discomfort in a closed-door meeting with King Charles just days after the leak. She told him it was unfair, a palace insider whispered. She felt it reeked of old favoritism, of punishing the rebel and rewarding the golden child. Charles, by contrast, was reportedly less emotional, more measured. He didn't object to William receiving the money, but he did express regret about how it was handled. His words, according to a leak, were chillingly honest. My father always played by his own rules, and now we're the ones left to clean up the mess. But was it really a mess? From Philip's perspective, it was clean, simple, practical. He believed in hierarchy. He believed in earning your place. And to him, William had done just that. William had never given an interview criticizing the monarchy, never taken a public swing at his family, never moved to Hollywood, or launched a podcast about generational trauma. He'd stayed, obeyed, endured, and that's what Philip was rewarding. But even supporters of this decision couldn't deny the timing was brutal. The monarchy was already fragile. Post-Megxit sentiment was polarized. Queen Elizabeth was barely in the ground when the leak detonated across the Atlantic. And now, William, the man long positioned as the future of the crown, was being painted as the secretly enriched heir, while Harry looked like the cast-off younger brother, abandoned and forgotten. Social media ran wild. One viral video edited together clips of William at public engagements, overlaid with cold music and the words, "He got the gold. His brother got the grief." Thousands of comments, millions of views. And then came the influencers, the podcast pundits, the YouTubers, all asking the same provocative question. Did William really deserve it? Or did Philip just pick a side? That's where the debate split down the middle. To royalists, the answer was obvious. William had stayed loyal, had upheld his end of the bargain. He was the heir in every sense. Philip wasn't playing favorites. He was protecting continuity. But to younger generations, especially in the US, the optics were appalling. Two brothers. One follows his heart. The other follows the rules. One gets money. The other gets exiled. It looked punitive. It looked strategic. But here's the most haunting twist. According to a palace mole speaking anonymously to a well-connected royal biographer, Philip didn't just write one version of the letter. He wrote a draft months earlier. It included both boys. He was going to split the estate. But something changed. Something after the Oprah interview. After the Netflix deal. After Spare began its ghostwriting process. If true, that changes the story entirely. Because it suggests that Harry was originally considered. That Philip intended to honor both grandsons. That he didn't want to take sides. Until something pushed him over the edge. Was it Meghan? Was it Harry's explosive accusations about royal racism? Was it that infamous line, "My father and brother are trapped"? Or was it something even more personal, like Harry implying that his family ignored Meghan's cries for help, or were indifferent to her mental health? Whatever it was, Philip took it as a betrayal, a rupture in the code of silence he'd upheld his entire life. And so he rewrote his legacy. He redrafted his fortune, and he gave it all to William. But here's the kicker. William didn't ask for any of it. Multiple palace aides confirmed that William had no prior knowledge of the letter's contents. No anticipation, no expectation, and when it was opened, he was as stunned as everyone else. His first words, reportedly, were, "Why me?" But he never turned it down. He never said, "Let's share it." He never offered Harry a cut, not publicly, not privately. And that decision, more than the letter itself, was what shattered whatever fragile peace remained between the brothers. Because Harry, blindsided and grieving, expected some gesture, some nod. Some recognition of the years they'd spent side by side, through trauma, through scandal, through the death of their mother. But instead, he got silence. No letter, no call, no check, just headlines. And perhaps that's the real heartbreak. Not the money, not the assets, but the symbolism. William was chosen. Harry was erased. And in doing so, Prince Philip, whether he meant to or not, did something no PR team, no palace advisor, no press statement could ever undo. He institutionalized the divide. He made it generational, permanent, financial, and now, the legacy of that decision is out in the open for the world to debate, dissect, and judge. But the letter wasn't finished. Because the final page, page 4, contains something else. Not about William, not about Harry, but a direct warning to the royal family itself. A prediction, and what it said would rattle even King Charles. It was just 2 words. 2 small, sharp, devastating words. But they changed everything. Not Harry. That's all it said. No elaboration. No context. No soft landing. Just a cold, surgical exclusion. And for millions watching around the world, those 2 words cut deeper than any formal declaration ever could. Because this wasn't a vague omission. It wasn't a quiet behind-the-scenes decision. It was explicit, intentional, a red line drawn in ink by a man who never wasted words. Prince Philip had written a letter to define his legacy, to pass on his personal wealth, yes, but more than that, to draw a moral line in the sand. And where Harry once stood firmly inside that line, he now found himself pushed out, utterly, undeniably, and permanently. But why? How did the man who once guided Harry through his first military parade, who shared salty jokes and stern lectures in equal measure, who was rumored to have privately encouraged him during the worst years after Diana's death, suddenly write him off? Was it betrayal? Was it personal disappointment? Or was it something even more devastating, something irreparable? Let's pull the thread. To understand the weight of this line, not Harry, we have to rewind to the man behind the pen. Prince Philip was a man of duty, discipline, tradition. He believed in service above self. And he loathed public vulnerability. He was raised in exile, forced to sleep on a school floor during war, educated by stern masters, groomed for one thing: loyalty to the structure that saved him from a rootless life. The British monarchy was more than his family. It was his purpose, his identity. So imagine his horror when, in his final years, he watched the institution he defended for 70 years turn into a global soap opera, led by none other than his own grandson. Harry's exit from the firm wasn't just a resignation in Philip's eyes. It was a breach. And then came Oprah, March 2021. The Queen's husband, already in and out of hospital, frail, recovering from heart surgery, reportedly watched the interview with a mix of disbelief and fury. Not at Meghan. He barely knew her. But at Harry, the man he had coached, who once asked him about joining the Royal Navy, who mimicked his stoic public demeanor for years, only to suddenly call the monarchy a trap on international television. One former staffer claims Philip's reaction to the interview was visceral. He stood up halfway through and turned it off, said it was self-pitying nonsense. He hated that it was airing family grievances. He believed the crown came before feelings. The irony, of course, is that Harry believed he was protecting his family, speaking his truth, building something freer, safer, healthier. But to Philip, it was mutiny, and that's where things began to shift. Just weeks after that interview aired, palace insiders say Prince Philip summoned one of his legal advisors to his study at Windsor Castle. He gave verbal instructions. Quiet, reserved, but unmistakable. He wanted to amend a letter he had begun drafting in late 2020. A letter intended to finalize the transfer of his personal assets. The original version? It mentioned both grandsons. A 50-50 split. Balanced. Diplomatic. But Philip now believed that parity was a mistake. He wanted the next generation to reflect stability, not chaos. And so he revised the letter. He crossed out one line, reworded another. Then, under the section referencing his personal estate, he inserted a single, devastating sentence. Not Harry. That's what the leaked version confirms. Not a longer justification. Not an apology. Not even an explanation. Just a door slammed shut. And that silence? That absence of elaboration? It's what sent shockwaves through the monarchy. Because it left everything open to speculation. Did Philip simply not trust Harry? Did he see him as a threat to tradition? Or did he view Harry as someone who had forfeited his place the moment he gave up his titles? One royal biographer put it like this. To Philip, loyalty wasn't just rewarded, it was demanded. And Harry, by airing family drama in public, broke an ancient code. It wasn't about racism or Meghan. It was about betrayal. Plain and simple. But here's the contradiction. Despite this searing judgment, Philip never once spoke out against Harry in public. Not at Trooping the Color. Not at any garden party. Not even during the Sussex's brief return visits. He kept his silence. And yet, behind that silence, was this sentence. This unspoken sentence that now, thanks to the leak, is global news. But was it really only about the Oprah interview? Because some palace insiders whisper that it wasn't a single moment that changed Philip's mind. It was a pattern. The pattern of press releases. The Netflix deal. The book deal. The slow drip of headlines. Each one another chip off the marble of royal decorum. And the final blow? Spare. According to one aide, when excerpts from Harry's memoir began leaking months before its release, Philip, already gravely ill, reportedly muttered, "If only he'd burned it instead." It was a private comment, off the cuff, but it spoke volumes. Harry had crossed a line that no one, not even Edward VIII, had dared cross. He'd pulled back the curtain. On William, on Charles, on Camilla, even on Philip himself. And though Spare wasn't released until after Philip's death, early copies and manuscripts had already made the rounds. Advisors had seen it. Whispers had reached Windsor. And Philip had made up his mind. He would not include Harry. Not in his estate. Not in his legacy. Not in history. Not Harry. That's what he wrote. And those two words have since become the most bitter punctuation mark in modern royal history. But the fallout wasn't limited to Harry. Because when William read those words for the first time, something shifted in him too. And the weight of being chosen began to feel more like a curse than a blessing. For William, reading that letter wasn't triumph. It was heartbreak. Because behind the grandeur, the millions, the supposed favoritism, there was something else. A door that had been slammed shut, and he'd been left standing alone on the other side, holding the key. When he first saw the line, "Not Harry," he reportedly reread it 3 times. Some say he blinked and went pale. Others say he didn't react at all. But behind his composed exterior, something cracked. Sources close to William claim he wasn't told about the letter in advance. He didn't expect to be named sole heir. And he certainly didn't ask to be a dividing line between his brother and their grandfather's memory. Because once that line was drawn, the choice wasn't just Philip's anymore. It was William's too. What do you do when you're given everything, but it comes at the cost of someone you once called your best friend? That's what the letter had done. Turned an already fractured sibling bond into a high-stakes moral dilemma. Because how could William accept the fortune without seeming complicit in Harry's exile? But how could he refuse it and dishonor the wishes of a man who built his life around duty, honor, and unshakable decisions? It was a trap, a gilded one, and William was now living inside it. Behind the scenes, multiple sources say William asked for privacy. He didn't want to make a statement. He didn't want to comment. But silence, in the middle of a media explosion, becomes its own kind of message. And Harry heard that message loud and clear. Because there was no call, no letter. "No, I didn't know. No, I'm sorry." Just headlines. William went on with royal duties, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, holding Kate's hand at charity events. Harry, meanwhile, was pacing the halls of his Montecito mansion, reading about his exclusion through social media and third-hand quotes. One of his friends put it bluntly. He was gutted, not just by the line, but by the fact that William didn't reach out. It was the final confirmation that the bridge had burned. But here's where things got even more twisted. Because while the public was focused on the phrase, "Not Harry," very few noticed something else hidden deeper in the letter. A footnote. For words. A throwaway clause that has now taken on mythic weight in royal circles. No further additions authorized. That's right. Philip didn't just exclude Harry. He locked the door. He barred the family, especially Charles, from altering the terms of his directive after his death. A legal firewall cloaked in royal language. That meant no renegotiation, no redistribution, no attempt to make it fair later on. Philip had made his choice, and he made sure no one else could undo it. That move, so Philip, so cold, so final, rattled even Charles. Because, in effect, it stripped him of authority over his own father's legacy. As king, Charles is supposed to be the central figure. But here, in this private matter, he was sidelined, powerless, disinherited not from money, but from influence. And that silence, from father to son, echoed down the line. Because Charles, cornered, embarrassed, and reportedly furious, also didn't call Harry. One source described it like this. The letter made everyone uncomfortable. No one wanted to be the one to break the news to Harry. So no one did. And so Harry learned the truth. The same way the rest of us did. Through the media. Through friends texting him links. Through Meghan showing him a screenshot of a leaked quote. Not Harry. Those words hit like a hammer. But instead of breaking down, Harry reportedly became eerily calm. One Montecito source said, "It was like he'd been expecting it. Not specifically, but emotionally. He always knew there was a line in the sand. He just didn't think it would be written down." And then came the anger. Private, quiet, directed not just at the letter, but at the institution behind it. Because Harry knew what this meant. Not just the money, but the narrative. The world now had proof, black and white proof, that the royal family didn't see him as one of them anymore. And if his own grandfather could write him out, what else could be taken away? That's when speculation began swirling about titles, about security, about the future of Archie and Lilibet's connection to the monarchy. If, not Harry, was the new standard, did that apply to his children? To his legacy? Was this just the beginning of a wider erasure? And then, suddenly, unprompted, a new rumor surfaced. That another document had been found, not from Philip, but from the Queen herself. A second letter, sealed, hidden, and addressed to Princess Charlotte. But before anyone could confirm it, before the palace could squash it, the rumor exploded online and turned speculation into wildfire. The focus shifted. But the pain of "not Harry" didn't disappear. Because it wasn't just a financial decision. It was a scar, a brand, a final rejection, sealed not with rage, but with silence. 2 words, 12 characters, a lifetime of meaning. And now the question echoed through every royal hallway, newsroom, and podcast studio. What happens when one of the world's oldest monarchies finally picks a side and chooses legacy over love? The answer? It was already unfolding. Inside the most unexpected chapter of all, because the second letter, the one written by Prince Philip just days after the first, it was addressed not to William, not to Charles, not even to the Queen. It was addressed to Princess Charlotte. And what it said would bring the entire royal legacy into question. What do you do when the man who shaped your childhood, who taught you what it meant to be royal, leaves behind a letter declaring that you're no longer worthy of the family name? How do you recover from that? According to multiple insiders, Harry hasn't. Not really. Not since those 6 final words scorched their way across the page of his grandfather's private letter. A prince who walks away is no prince at all. That was Prince Philip's verdict. Unfiltered. Absolute. Not as a grandfather. Not even as a patriarch. But as a man forged in fire, who survived exile, war, scandal, and a lifetime of walking behind the Queen without complaint. And in his final years, what he saw in Harry wasn't strength. It was abandonment. Let's unpack that. Because the truth is, Prince Philip's feelings about Harry were more complicated than most of the media has dared to admit. This wasn't some cold-blooded disinheritance made out of spite or cruelty. At its core, it was a heartbreaking shift, from pride to disappointment, from legacy to loss. In many ways, Harry had once been Philip's favorite. That's not speculation. That's fact. From the moment Harry was old enough to joke, to ride, to march, Philip saw in him a reflection of himself. A spark of mischief, yes, but also courage, independence, defiance with purpose. Where William was more polished, more restrained, more Windsor, Harry was raw, intuitive. And in the early days, Philip loved that. In fact, it was Philip who encouraged Harry to pursue a military career, who pushed him toward Sandhurst, who gave him brutally honest advice about leadership. You lead with your back straight, not with your feelings. That's something Philip once barked at a young Harry after a heated polo match that ended with Harry storming off the field. But somewhere between the war zones of Afghanistan and the manicured chaos of Kensington Palace, something began to fracture. The public Harry, the cheeky spare, the rogue prince, the dependable soldier, started to slip away. And Philip noticed. The turning point? The royal wedding. May 19, 2018. On the surface, Philip was supportive. He attended, despite recovering from hip surgery. He smiled for cameras. He stood tall at age 96, barely showing discomfort. But behind the scenes, insiders say Philip was cautious. Meghan Markle was an unknown quantity. American, divorced, a former actress. None of those things alone were disqualifying in Philip's eyes. But the combination? It concerned him. And more than that, he was disturbed by the pace. One former aide claims Philip muttered to Charles just weeks before the wedding. Too fast. He doesn't see the trap coming. To Philip, marriage wasn't about love alone. It was about stability, containment, reinforcement of the crown, and Harry, swept up in romance, was, in Philip's words, playing by civilian rules in a military institution. Still, Philip kept his reservations private. He showed up, played his part, even welcomed Meghan with a warm nod and what one observer described as genuine effort. But the cracks widened fast. The complaints began rolling in. Private staff members quit. Whispers emerged about tension between Meghan and Kate, about Harry lashing out at courtiers, about late-night emails and unreachable demands. To most of the royal family, this was palace life as usual. Drama happened. Tempers flared. It always blew over. But not this time. Because by 2019, Harry wasn't just frustrated. He was angry. He was speaking out, breaking protocol, suing tabloids, dodging royal reporters at engagements. And then came the bombshell interview during the couple's Africa tour, where Harry openly admitted his struggles. "We're brothers. We're on different paths." Philip reportedly watched that segment in complete silence. His only comment? "He's lost the plot." And then came the real blow, Megxit. January 2020. An announcement on Instagram. No warning to the Queen. No prior discussion with Charles. Just a sudden, explosive exit from royal life. Philip's reaction? According to a senior staffer, absolute rage. But not loud. Cold. Surgical. Controlled fury. He believed Harry had not just broken rank, but broken trust. To Philip, you don't step back from duty. You don't cherry-pick engagements. You don't monetize royal status. You either serve the crown, or you step aside forever. And Harry, in his eyes, was trying to have it both ways. The final straw? The Oprah interview. It wasn't just that Harry and Meghan aired grievances. It was how they did it. Emotional, wounded, accusatory, and worst of all, public. The exact opposite of how Philip had lived his life. This was a man who had suffered his own humiliations, scandals, family disasters. But he never went on television to cry about it. He never betrayed the firm. And now here was his grandson, sitting beside a Hollywood billionaire, describing the monarchy as toxic, calling the institution trapped, and making allegations that could fracture the Commonwealth. It wasn't just a betrayal of tradition. It was a betrayal of trust. And so, when Philip sat down in his Windsor study one final time to finish the sealed letter he'd been drafting, his hand trembling slightly from age, but his mind razor-sharp, he wrote the line that would seal Harry's fate. He abandoned his duty. A sentence designed to outlive them both. A statement to echo down the generations. And in Philip's view, that was all that needed to be said. But what happened when that line reached Harry? What did it feel like to be written off? Not in anger, but in judgment. That's where everything turned. That's where the letter stopped being just an inheritance note and became something far more personal, far more dangerous. Because on page 3, Prince Philip reportedly made a series of pointed, almost poetic reflections. Not about wealth, not about logistics, but about legacy, loyalty, and blood. And within that page was a line so stark, so direct, that it left even seasoned royal aides speechless. Not all heirs wear crowns. And not all bloodlines deserve the weight of tradition. It was a philosophical slap, a coded message. But to those who followed the royal family's every high and low, the interpretation wasn't difficult. Philip was drawing a line between Harry and William that had nothing to do with their titles and everything to do with their choices. He was, in essence, saying, one of you chose duty, the other chose freedom, and I choose to honor only one of those paths. Think about the weight of that. A grandfather who once shared meals, war stories, and private jokes with both boys, choosing, in the end, to honor only one. A man who knew the sacrifices of monarchy firsthand, who gave up his naval career, who swallowed scandal after scandal without flinching, who knelt behind the throne for 70 years. That man believed in loyalty above all else. And to him, Harry broke that code. Whether you agree or not, that was Philip's stance. And now, thanks to the leak, the world knew it. But the ripple effects? They were only beginning. Because as this page of the letter spread through media circles, scrubbed, redacted, quoted with care, but never denied, it sparked a wave of outrage. Not just from Sussex fans, not just from American commentators, but from inside the royal household. Sources say Princess Anne was one of the first to express concern, not over the content, but the fallout. She feared it would deepen the fracture, one insider revealed. She understood why her father wrote it, but she also knew it would cause damage no PR team could fix. And she was right, because Harry's team in Montecito, caught off guard by the leak, scrambled to control the narrative. Within hours, a statement, thinly veiled but emotionally raw, was posted to a close friend's social media. It read, "We all have memories of those we've lost. Some carry warmth, some carry lessons, but none should be weaponized." It didn't mention Philip, or the letter, or the inheritance, but everyone knew exactly what it meant. And from there, the storm only grew. Questions began flooding into royal legal departments. Was this letter legally binding? Did Harry have grounds to contest it? Could the leak be traced? Lawyers whispered about a possible moral breach, though not a legal one. After all, if the fortune had already been dispersed, as it appeared, it was unlikely anything could be reversed without a massive scandal. But the PR scandal? That was already well underway. The hashtag Justice for Harry trended for 48 hours straight. American news outlets debated royal fairness on primetime television. Oprah's former guests weighed in. And lurking beneath all of it was a darker, more conspiratorial whisper. Had Meghan known about the letter before it leaked? It was a question that rattled more than a few royal insiders, because the timing was convenient. A month before the leak, Meghan had reportedly declined a private invitation from Charles to attend a Royal Foundation event in London. No clear reason was given, but insiders now speculated. Did she already know they were being written out? Of course, no one could prove it, and no official statement ever addressed it. But in the court of public opinion, the damage was done. And yet, despite all this chaos, all this noise, one figure remained publicly silent. Prince William, the chosen heir to Philip's personal fortune, the named recipient of the Duke's trust, the one his grandfather had publicly, posthumously anointed. Not a word, no quote, no appearance, no denial, no celebration, nothing. And that silence, oddly, spoke louder than any press release could have. It painted a picture of restraint, of control, of a man who knew the power of a legacy and the danger of defending it too aggressively. But behind the scenes, sources say William was furious the letter had leaked, not because of what it said, but because it forced him into a corner. A symbolic inheritance turned scandal. According to one aide, William said, "This wasn't about money. It was about trust. And now it's been turned into gossip." The palace immediately launched a quiet internal investigation into the leak. Fingers pointed, emails were scrubbed, digital trails combed, but nothing stuck. The person who leaked the letter had covered their tracks brilliantly. No one was fired, no arrests, no confession, and the damage was irreversible. Because here's the bitter truth the palace couldn't spin away. This letter had pulled the curtain back on something the monarchy never wanted the world to see. Favoritism, not just parental, but generational, institutional. For decades, the royals had insisted that every grandchild was loved equally. That blood was thicker than duty. That family came first. But Prince Philip's letter told a different story. A story in which loyalty was rewarded, dissent was punished, and love was conditional. To many, it was heartbreaking. To others, just confirmation of what they always suspected. And to Harry? Well, according to friends, it was the final betrayal. Because this wasn't about tabloids or headlines or public opinion. This was about his grandfather, the man who taught him to drive a carriage, who sat next to him at Sandringham dinners, who told war stories while polishing antique rifles. This was about family, and now he had been written out, literally. But what no one expected, not even William, was that this letter wasn't the only one. Because buried in the same sealed folder, just a few inches away, was a second envelope. And what it revealed would shift the royal narrative once again, in the most unexpected direction. Why would Prince Philip bypass his own children and leave everything to his grandson? Not a portion, not a token, not a symbolic heirloom, but everything. That's the question that's haunting every corridor of Buckingham Palace right now. The question that tabloids, talk shows, and legal advisors are picking apart like a puzzle that shouldn't exist. Because according to what's now become one of the most disruptive leaks in royal memory, the Duke of Edinburgh didn't divide his personal fortune among his children. He didn't split it between Charles and Andrew or Edward. He didn't even acknowledge them in the letter. Instead, he named one man, and one man only, as the sole recipient of his private legacy, Prince William. And that move, shocking as it seems, wasn't accidental. It wasn't rushed. It was planned, calculated, and delivered with the kind of surgical coldness that only Philip could muster. Let William carry my legacy. He understands service. He accepts duty. He will not squander what I built. That's the direct quote, word for word, as leaked from the third page of the letter. A legacy, not defined by blood, but by behavior. And in just 14 words, Philip both crowned his grandson and condemned the rest of them. Because make no mistake, this was more than just an inheritance. This was a statement, a passing of the torch not from father to son, but from grandfather to grandson, skipping over generations, defying tradition, bypassing the expected line of descent in favor of something more personal, more deliberate, a choice. But what exactly did William inherit? Let's dig into the numbers. At the time of his death in April 2021, Prince Philip's personal fortune was estimated between £30 and £36 million. That's not the Crown Estate, not the Duchy of Lancaster. That's entirely separate from the institutional wealth of the monarchy. This was his private money, earned, invested, and protected over decades. How did he amass that kind of wealth? Not from his royal salary. That was modest, especially compared to modern standards. No, Philip was quietly one of the savviest financial minds in the royal family. Naval pension aside, he had two aces up his sleeve. Early investments in European shipping ventures post-World War II, particularly in Malta, where he and the young Queen Elizabeth once lived as newlyweds. Rare